Noah, would you mind bringing me a light? And could I borrow a clock from you? Thank you. Yeah, it's very futuristic. Is it in your eye now? It's always in someone's eye. Okay. This one? Okay. Is that better? So, good evening, everyone. Friends. Thanks, Hunt. We'll call and response. Good evening, everyone who's joining us on the Cloud Zendo. So this is our fourth of 4 talks about the precepts, and on the 13th of next month, on the 10th of next month, the 10th, there'll be Jukai for a lot of people in the local sangha and the chaplaincy body. And let me just catch us up a little bit where we've been. So we started at the beginning of the month with the 3 treasures, the 3 refuges. Noah asked us, what does it mean to be a Buddhist? And are you Buddhish or Buddhist? And we talked about taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. And then I gave the next talk and I talked about repentance and vow and the 3 perspectives. So the literal, the relational, the intrinsic or ultimate perspective. And I'm going to continue on that today. And then Noah gave our last talk last week on the 3 pure precepts, which I think his title was something like The Contours of the Awakened Mind. And which is somewhat cribbed from a Reb Anderson ascension quote, which was the 3 pure precepts describe the structure and fundamental design of the enlightened mind. So this was the kind of depth of these 3 pure precepts, the follow the 3 treasures. And on my talk, the talk before that, I talked about the precept of not lying. And so I thought today we'd delve into the 10 grave precepts, but we're not going to cover all 10 grave precepts. That was like one approach. We could just go through all the precepts. I thought I'd be skipping, like cantering. So I decided maybe we don't do that. But I'm going to just delve into 3 of them and see if they open up something about this relationship between the 3 refuges, the 3 pure precepts, and then this body of what Noah reminded us are sometimes called the prohibitory precepts, or the kind of do's and don'ts. And in our tradition, of course, these aren't, this isn't a deontological structure. This isn't like a act this way, don't act this way. And so how are they pointing us toward our life and toward this thing that we've spoken about before, which is kind of returning to our life as it is, or the contours of an awakened mind actually being the contours of the precepts. Did I lay out at all where we're going? Kinda. Okay. I wrote this today, and I don't know what's on it. I'm just going to stop there. I was reading a Atlantic article by George Packer. He's an incredible journalist. Maybe for me the most kind of insightful journalist about kind of the American soul or the American project. It's an incredible book called The Unwinding, which I think won the National Book Award, about this process it feels like America's been in a particular way the past decade or two. And he had an article in The Atlantic about Afghanistan, and particularly the SIV system, the visas, the special visas that people who help the US troops and US aid and international aid in Afghanistan, the interpreters in particular, a way to get them to safety, because the Taliban view them as collaborators and often have a desire to kill them and their family quite directly. And that program has been, and it's an incredible essay, very detailed, heartbreaking stories, essentially laying out how broken that system has been for 20 years. And all the people one person in particular who helped the Green Berets for 3 years and then helped an international aid group and can't get through this visa process and is stuck there and is getting death threats. So I read this article, which I encourage everyone to read. It's, I think because we're talking so much about Russia and Ukraine, and it can be so easy to skip over or like go right past the fact that we have this responsibility and this engagement still going on in Afghanistan and elsewhere. And I was trying to figure out how to like make this a precept discussion about that. And it didn't work. I think Norman Fisher wrote something in one of the books I was reading in preparation, which was essentially the ultimate view is the view that there is evil. Evil happens, and not ignoring it. The ultimate view is allowing the ways in which we harm each other to be felt and to be true. And you kind of begin and end there. There's nothing else to do with it. So I thought we'd delve into the specifics of the precepts, and maybe that will unearth itself, which is why I kind of rewrote things and I don't know what's written. So before I go into what is written here, I want to say one other thing about the precepts, which is that in considering them and studying this month with all of you, I've really been asking, particularly during Zazen, like what's my relationship to these 16 precepts? And when we sow Rakasu and when we sow our Okesa, we're sowing the precepts into, particularly the 3 treasures, the 3 refuges, into each stitch. So we say Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dharmam Saranam Gacchami, and Sangham Saranam Gacchami, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, as we sow, to kind of feel the sowing in of this vow in our life. You know, it takes time to sow these things, so we're giving our time to them. It's a physical manifestation of the robe of the Buddha. And there's a way in which they're an ethical structure, but they also seem to be something else. And, you know, I probably will disagree with like half of what I've only written today. So in case it's, I like really disagree with it, I think the one thing that's come to the surface for me is that the precepts, Bodhisattva precepts, are something we, with time and with practice, feel a sense of responsibility to. We are responsible to these precepts. It's maybe clearest when we say we're responsible to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. We can kind of get that. But I think actually we're responsible to the whole body of these precepts. And the value in that, the treasure of that, is that they may be the only thing that won't change. That is because they're kind of made of change. They're not static themselves. But, you know, we're responsible to each other always in our relationships. We're responsible to our friends, our family, our Sangha. And actually leaving Sangha out, we're responsible to each other, but we we die, we mess up all the times, we're kind of in the muck of things. And in some way, I think of this in particular, I think because I read this George Packer piece, and I think we're responsible to our country too in some way, to the project of our community. And yet, how does our country let us down? How do our kind of structures let us down? And so maybe this is something, the precepts are something for us that we can return to, obviously as a practice, but also as some territory of our life already as it is. And if we can see it that way, if we can relate to it that way, then we can be responsible to something other than just our whims, just our desires. And then that's so relieving, because it's exhausting to be responsible just to our wants, right? So if we can find something that we really commit to that's not just, well, we want it this way and not that way, we can settle into that. And we can give ourselves to that kind of practice, that truth, and it can give itself to us. That's what's come up for me. How does that sound? People, anyone want to take issue for that? I'd love to. Sounds true. Sounds true. Okay, well here's the rest of tonight's talk. So just as a reminder, we have the literal perspective, these three perspectives, which will apply in some way, which is to just literally keep the precepts as they're written. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. We have the compassionate level, which is that we sometimes violate the precepts in order to help others, that sometimes that's necessary. And if we're not taking into consideration the context of things, we'll miss that truth when it's in front of us. Birds aren't real. Thank you, Noah. It's true. On the intrinsic level, or the ultimate level, there's the view that there's no way to keep the precepts. There's no way to break the precepts. That all precepts are always broken, always kept. That they're beyond good and evil, right and wrong, keeping or not keeping. And what I want to explore today, and I'm just going to pick 3 precepts, is the way in which these 3 views are really views, and they can help us see the complexity and aliveness of the precepts, and they are not true, capital T, true, they aren't it's this and this and this, and they are not lived as separate from each other. So we can't live the ultimate perspective of the precepts outside the relative reality of our limited bodies, the time we're in right now, the fact that we have to choose between acting or not acting, between what we think is right and what we think is wrong, that is always going to be the relative space, context within which the absolute emerges. So these are not, can't be held as ideas, and they can't really be lived as separate. But when we step back and we're looking at the richness of the precepts, they can be useful in shedding light on, okay, what's there? So the first, we were at not lying, and I thought we'd just go 2 weeks ago, and I thought we'd just keep going to the 5th pure precept, which is refrain from using intoxicants, our favorite precept. So I'll start with Bodhidharma's one mind precepts, and this is kind of his formulation. And then I found myself drawing a lot from Maizumi Roshi and from his teacher Yasutani and Roshi. So there's kind of their view here, and then where that leads us. So Bodhidharma, his formulation, or what we attribute to him, goes, the self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. In the intrinsically pure Dharma, not allowing the mind to become dark, is called the precept of refraining from using intoxicants. So this is what Yasutani writes about this. He says, the whole universe is nothing other than inconceivably wondrous self-nature, the intrinsically pure Dharma. There's not even one drop of liquor to incite the drunkenness of ignorance. Yet, ordinary individuals, dreaming, concoct the liquor of dualism, drinking it themselves. Ordinary individuals concoct the liquor of dualism, drinking it themselves, and cause others to drink it, and carry on tumultuously. The minds of all ordinary individuals are like this. If they could just awaken from the hallucination of self and other, from this dualism, their ignorance would cease. If they could just awaken, their ignorance would cease. So this is interesting because he doesn't actually talk about like wine or beer or cigarettes or Facebook. Like this jumps right into the kind of ultimate view, as Yasutani often does, which is we shouldn't muddy the mind. And here's a clear way we muddy the mind. We get drunk. Wow, how useful. We get to feel the effects of intoxication in like a very physical way. Like the hangover can't be avoided. You can't like spiritually bypass the feeling of the hangover or like the feeling of not being able to walk straight. Like, oh, how useful. And and it, it's not so good. We see how we act when we're intoxicated. And it can remind us that we intoxicate ourselves and others in all sorts of ways. Primarily for us as Buddhists, we intoxicate ourselves and others when we convince ourselves that we're separate, when we entice others to believe that they're separate. And this is as bad as kind of like getting someone drunk and asking them to drive. Like this really can lead us astray. And so there's an interesting aspect of this precept, which is that the word use, so it's called refraining from using intoxicants. That word use in Chinese and in Japanese, it also implies to buy or to sell. So it can also be read and is read as do not buy or sell liquor or intoxicants. And so whenever we give someone a drink, we're encouraging them perhaps to have another drink and then another drink, and their mind becomes dark and clouded, as Bodhidharma says. And similarly with dualistic thoughts, we can sell our dualistic thoughts. So each time we give others our own polemical views, our own thoughts of this is right and this is wrong, and it's definitely this way, righteousness, corruptness, whatever we're selling, we're handing out this liquor of dualism. We're selling liquor. And we think about this a little bit, and it's a useful frame because we're always selling something. We're always selling, or you could say it might be easier to think of it, we're always giving something, right? We're always giving each other our mind. And so we can ask, well, what are we giving? What are we selling? And this is a tidbit from Maizumi that I didn't know, which is that supposedly it's a common saying to say that the bodhisattva's job is selling water by the river. You heard this? So the bodhisattva, what does a bodhisattva do? Bodhisattva sells water by the river. Right, why sell water by the river? There's a whole bunch of water right there. Kind of absurd to just sell it. Who would buy it anyways? And also, not only is there a ton of water by the river, like right here, but you're made of water. Like we already are water. What are we grasping for? And so no one needs to buy it, and yet we end up buying things. Like it's our nature to buy things. Seems particularly true now. And so this nature we have, this karma we have to sell things, to buy things, to want to trade up with what we have and want to like barter, to get something new or get something better, we can use that nature to sell things as they are, or our Buddha nature, to one another and buy it from one another. It's a wonderful way to kind of engage that habit. And so, because this is our habit, a bodhisattva sells water by the river. If we don't sell water, we end up selling liquor. If it's not the water, which would be maybe our presence, our generosity, our love, our care, then we slide into selling and buying things like grasping, avoidance, fear, oblivion. And so a bodhisattva sells what's already in abundance. This is the practice of not selling intoxicants. What we already have and what's already there, what's already ubiquitous, but what we forget is precious. And by selling it, there's this sense of holding up what's precious. And so we actually do this in our society. There's ways in which we sell like what we don't have or what we don't need. In this wonderful world of capitalism, it's amazing what you can find online. And a few years ago, I found that you can buy stars. Did you know this? You can go online and for like $19.99, you can buy a star. You can name the star. And then you can give the star to someone else. You don't actually have the star. No, the name actually never existed and doesn't change. But you get a little photo of like the galaxy that the star's in. And then you can give that galaxy, that star, to someone else. Now, I think, as I said in my last Dharma talk, there are more stars than grains of sand by like a factor of 1,000. More stars than grains of sand on Earth by quite a lot. And so you're giving something ubiquitous, almost limitless. And I did this with my brother a few years ago. I gave him the star. It was wonderful. Named it after him. He kept the picture of like the galaxy by his sink. And it was his star. I didn't know at the time I think the best thing I've ever given him. And it was definitely better than the deep fryer I once gave him. So in looking back, maybe that was a bit like selling water by a river. So the other thing to say about this precept is that it's really easy when we look at it this way to see that all the other precepts, this is one of the ways the precepts work, are nested inside it. So every precept has all the other precepts kind of included in it, like Indra's net. And so when we see that creating self and other, selling this idea of self and other to each other is how we don't hold up this precept, then we also see that when we lie to one another, we're separating ourselves. That when we puff ourselves up and put others down, we're separating ourselves. That when we break the other grave precepts in particular, there's the activity of selling a mind of separateness to ourselves and others. And thus, at the heart of this concept is fostering a mind of poverty in ourselves or others would be breaking this precept. And in some way that's embedded here in all of the 10 prohibitive precepts. And so when we don't do this, we hold up ourselves, we hold up each other. We're selling water by the river. We're sharing a broad sky while floating right in the middle of an endless sky. And we become merchants of emptiness. Maybe that's the job of bodhisattvas. And then we forget and we fall down, and hopefully there's a brother or sister nearby who's selling water, and we can buy it from them, and we can remember. So there's one other interesting thing Yasutani Roshi says about this precept. It may be a little controversial. And he says that sometimes enlightened people will continue to buy and drink liquor. This is because our habit patterns are so difficult to reform. When this is the case, he says, we should do so humbly and in private, repentant that past habit patterns are so difficult to transform. this is kind of an interesting take. This is like relational take. Sometimes we're gonna be so habituated to ways of dividing up the world between self and other, we have that habit, or maybe even just drinking wine, that an even an enlightened person can't put it down completely. But he's saying here, if that's the case, don't be proud about it. Don't say, well, I've never broken a precept in my life. He's saying, we're humble about it because we know that our habits affect each other. And that whenever we're engaging in that habit, we're inviting others to do so, we're affecting others. And so in some way we're selling this delusion, and so we're cognizant of that. And I think this is controversial because there's some notion of kind of shame in it. We know there's a sense of regret or shame in the habit, and shame is not a thing we talk about or like hold up as useful. And there's a reason for this. Shame itself is dualistic, right? It's like we should do this, we shouldn't do that. And it also can be used to control and manipulate. So shame is like the core social technology or mechanism by which social norms are implemented. And when they're abused, shame is the way by which social norms become social control. So we have like some healthy skepticism around, acting, doing something privately, because we don't want to share it. And what I think is interesting about this is twofold. One is that suggestion, the other is that it reminds us that the precepts are not our politics, but our practice. And so the precepts are always a map for our own practice. How do we conduct ourselves? How do we wake up to our life? Not how should others conduct themselves? How should they wake up to our idea about their perfect life or whatever it is? And in that way, this sense of knowing that we have habits that are difficult to transform and feeling a sense of regret and wanting, even maybe as we participate in them, to turn our heart towards transforming them is a very powerful way to, I think, engage our habits. It's that relational way of not everything's black and white. Not everything is I keep it or I don't keep it. And if we don't have space to feel the kind of distance between our ideal for our actions and the reality of our actions, the precepts can become very punishing, very stark. And so he says in this kind of wonderfully inviting way, even enlightened people have habits they're working to transform, but they realize it as they do it. No question. So this is kind of an insight from the relational perspective, and one we can live out in some way we can be in relationship with our own habits. Wow. Time just flies. So the seventh precept, let's go there, which is do not elevate myself and put others down. So Bodhidharma's one-mind precept for the seventh precept reads, self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. In the undifferentiated Dharma, not speaking of self and other is called the precept of refraining from praising yourself and putting others down. So this kind of frame, Bodhidharma's one-mind practices or one-mind precepts, they're always coming back to this ultimate view of when we divide, when we create self and other, we can't uphold the precept. The precept necessarily is difficult to maintain, maybe impossible to maintain. So how do I not elevate myself and put others down when I don't see us as intrinsically one, as inextricable? Isn't it just our nature when we separate to want to protect this and avoid that, or to want to be puffed up here and necessarily someone else will have to define my goodness by their badness. Or maybe I'm, depressed, and so I'm actually really bad, and someone else's goodness will have to define my badness. We can't help it. And it's this beautiful way, just not speaking of self and other, this kind of right to the essence way that the Bodhidharma One Mind precepts put it. And, it can be exhausting to constantly be comparing, constantly protecting the self, defining the other. And so this is a kind of reminder of cutting that off. So Yasutani writes, "The existence of anyone is that of oneself that has swallowed the entire universe." So the existence of anyone is that of oneself that has swallowed the entire universe. Yet, without knowing that we are this majestic self, we make ourselves small. And in our small selfishness, we mistakenly postulate an other. Imagine a gulf between self and other where none actually exists, and then exalt ourselves and criticize others. This is the upside-down delusion of sentient beings. So we can practice this precept literally by simply refraining from the activity of dividing. Activities like puffing ourselves up, putting others down. Activities like gossiping. I mean, this is where kind of speaking of others' faults and errors and this get really intertwined. But I find that when sometimes here in the resident body, things get really topsy-turvy and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we right the ship again? And we talk about, well, what's gone sideways? And it's, maybe we're talking about people who are acting improperly. And at the beginning, that kind of conversation, for me, is the relational level of this precept. You speak of faults and errors, you speak of what's going right and wrong to figure out what to do. And then the more you stay there, eventually, very quickly usually, you end up just gossiping. You're just kvetching, or you're just like whatever. And I feel the difference in my body quite quickly. There's like a sense of being with, and then a sense of being the commentator of a football game, saying who's getting to what yard line. And that shift, I think, is what this precept, and maybe that precept too, is calling us to. Do not be deceived by this creation of self and other, by becoming the commentator. And so that shift reminded me of a koan, which is of Zen master Zhuigan and his morning routine. Do you know Zhuigan's morning routine? Sure he does. So this is Zhuigan's morning routine. Or Zhuigan. Zhuigan wakes up in the morning, every morning, and the first thing he does is he calls to himself. He says, "Is the master in? Is the master in?" And Zhuigan responds, "Yes, yes, I'm in." And then he continues questioning himself. He says, "Are you really awake?" And he pauses and he thinks. He says, "Yes, yes, I'm really awake." And then he advises himself, "Zhuigan, do not be deceived by others." No, 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 I will not be deceived by others. And then he goes about his day. So who's going to deceive Zhuigan? Where are these mischievous others? So this is, I think, what we're watching out for. The idea of an other that is higher or lower. And the seed of that in the mind is like leaving the breath as we sit in Zazen. We go away from this very life and we notice it with our whole body, just like we do when we sit Zazen. And when we do, we return. And I think even speaking to ourselves can be useful. So we can start the day or notice we're talking and we can say, "Is Kozan in?" "Yes, yes, I'm in." "Kozan, are you awake?" "Okay, now I'm awake." "Okay, Kozan, do not be deceived by othering." Okay, no, I won't. I will not be deceived. It's just like sitting on the cushion and asking, what is this? We can remember not to forsake this precept. Yasutani writes, when you hear an expression like Dharmakaya, the reality body, the realized body, don't search elsewhere or far away for the truth. That's being deluded. The Dharmakaya is completely self. Okay, so the 10th precept. 10th precept, anybody? 10th grave precept, pure mind precepts? Someone's got it. Do not disparage the three treasures. So here's Bodhidharma's one mind precept. Here's how it reads for the 10th precept. Self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. That's how they all start. In the one Dharma, not giving rise to the dualistic view of sentient beings and Buddhas is called the precept of refraining from reviling the three treasures. Not giving rise to the dualistic view of sentient beings and Buddhas is called the precept of refraining from reviling the three treasures. So this 10th grave precept, is a full circle, right? We end where we began. We begin by taking refuge in the three treasures. We end by vowing to maintain them, arriving to them, giving ourselves to them, and vowing to take care of them. This kind of full circle of the precepts. And here again, of course, Bodhidharma, as is true in all of the precepts, is asking us to not give rise to a view of self and other. And this way of seeing self as another is sentient beings and Buddhas, to not separate. In fact, there's only Buddhas, he's saying. When we give rise to the thought of, I am merely a sentient being, this is Yasutani, we forsake the three treasures. So when we give rise to the thought, I'm merely a sentient being, this is forsaking the three treasures. This is not holding up this precept. And the operative word there is merely. I am a sentient being. Yeah, I'm also a Buddha. But if I'm merely a sentient being, one day I'll be a Buddha, but today I'm merely, then, immediately we've lost it. And so we notice this distance between the thought of this immediate life and the thought of the life we want to have, or the Buddha life we will have. And in noticing it, we close the gap. No merely. We just let merely fall away. This is also the sixth patriarch imploring us to take refuge in the Buddha of your own mind. If you cannot take refuge in the Buddha of your own mind, he says, there will be nowhere to take refuge. This very mind is Buddha, another way he puts it. So what's interesting or useful about this is that when we don't feel this to be true, it seems everything is just, lost, delusional, sentient beings kind of fumbling over ourselves and each other. The whole world looks like mud when we don't think this is true. And, we're convinced we're merely sentient beings, and we're this kind of, it's kind of a not so entertaining joke. We're Buddhas convincing ourselves that we're not Buddhas. And so when we're like this, when we feel this way, which is not uncommon, for me at least, we make this vow not to revile or trample on the three treasures, which is a vow not to forsake oneself. And we make this vow, and this vow above all of them may be a vow most rooted in faith, that even when we can't see it or feel it, we know it to be true. We have given ourselves to its truth. That you are in fact a Buddha. I am in fact a Buddha. Even when we are certain, it seems, that that can't be true. And so this is the way the precepts work from the outside in. That we give ourselves to the precepts and they keep us from forsaking ourselves. And when we do want to forsake ourselves or we forget ourselves, they're also the map by which we return. We close the gap. And once we return, the precepts, it turns out, are just the contours of our Buddha nature as they are. And so if we simply vow not to throw the three treasures under the bus, we vow to not fall so far away from ourselves. And in this way, the 16 precepts point us back to the activity of vow, that we're not simply choosing to commit to these things and then banking that choice in our karma bank. We're in this activity of vowing. So I'm going to go over, and I apologize, and feel free if you have somewhere else you have to be and you're joining us on the cloud. But this activity of vow reminds me of a story at the end of Dogen's Genjo Koan, which is the kind of archetypal story of continuous practice. So this is Mayu fanning himself. So Dogen writes, Mayu was fanning himself, and a monk approached and said, Master, the nature of wind is permanent, and there's no place it does not reach. Why then do you fan yourself? And Mayu responds, although you understand that the nature of wind is permanent, you do not understand the meaning of its reaching everywhere. What is the meaning of its reaching everywhere? The monk replies. And Mayu just keeps fanning himself. The monk bows deeply and departs. Dogen writes of this, the actualization of the Buddha Dharma, the vital path of its authentic transmission, is like this. If you say that you do not need to fan yourself because the nature of wind is permanent, and you can have wind without fanning yourself, you understand neither permanence nor the nature of wind. The nature of wind is permanent, and because of that, the wind of the Buddha house brings forth the gold of the earth and ripens the cream of the long river. In other words, we bring forth the Buddha Dharma through practice. The wind is always there. The Buddha Dharma is always there. We need but practice it. And if we lay around watching Netflix, we may never feel its pleasant air. We may. Nothing wrong with Netflix. But like not forever. And so to fully appreciate your life right now in its ineffable, stunning beauty, as Maizumi Roshi's teachings bring us back to again and again, and I've so appreciated reading this week, to appreciate our life, to actively show up and appreciate that we're not separate, and this life includes everything. That's the gold of the earth, the cream of the river of change. So I'm departing at the end of this week, and I don't know when the next time I'll be so embedded in this resident body. It's been 2 years since I last departed for any period of time. And it's been 2 years during a pandemic. And it's always difficult to know what that'll feel like across the threshold when I leave, but I've been reflecting on the my love of this Sangha and this community. And I'm gonna do some traveling, I'm gonna do some work in the marketplace. And I've been reaching out to residents who've left to ask for advice, what's worked for them, and just curious as I'm crossing this threshold as I have before, knowing that it's in Sangha where we wake up together, but it's because of this nature of the precepts, this nature of practice, that this is how we realize these things. I've been curious just how people are who've come through here, who I haven't heard from for a long time. And I reached out to a bunch of people and I just asked, how are the precepts showing up in your life? And what stays with you? So I wanted to share just a few people who wrote back, if I could. And some people in this room know who wrote me. And the first is from Sean, or Zazen, who was a resident here for some time. And I left at the beginning of the pandemic, maybe, right in the midst there. A Canuck, a Canadian. A genuinely thoughtful guy, just to the core, thought deeply about everything. And so he wrote, it's been 1.5 years since I left Upaya. And one thing I've learned is that Sangha is not limited to time or place. Support and reciprocity are found in small, everyday ways, provided you carry the spirit of Sangha close to your heart. You need to feel it deeply in a community first, he says. This joy of practicing here, we feel it deeply together. And then you can expand your circle beyond any particular place or people. It turns out the Zendo is quite portable too. No matter where I practice, I can close my eyes and find myself back in that space. Having spent months practicing there, it really does get into your bones. Since leaving the community, I probably don't study and contemplate the precepts as often as I should, he says. I failed often back then, and I continue to fail now, but it's always with the knowledge that the precepts can be relied upon to get me back on track. So that's Zazen. Molly wrote. Molly was here for 2 years, taught us contact improv for a while and Qigong, was an amazing cook in the kitchen here, and was like a piece of the mountains. She said, this was so interesting. She wrote, I learned a lot about showing up even when I didn't want to. Having responsibilities I didn't want, being in a community with people I didn't choose, and somehow all that was actually easier than the alternative. It was really good for me to be committed to and be responsible to the residents, because I connected to the place in me that loved and cared for something in everyone. And I saw how my own behavior affects people and how it could also be so self-protective at times. It was valuable to have the day in, day out sense of place, community, and schedule, to watch the rising and falling of dramas and insecurities. Seemingly serious circumstances turned out not to be so serious. Something in the rhythm and trust in the practice and the grit of the practice and the spirit of the place could hold a bass note of connection, something more real and true. Really sweet to hear from Molly. And she said, regarding the precepts, my North Star precept is I vow to cultivate a mind that sees clearly, and it's a commitment that I continue in a big way to this day. Those Molly's words. Okay, I'll read 2 more. We have 5 minutes? People, sure? Okay. Voice of echo in these halls. So this is from Peter. Peter was here for about 2 years. He was also one of the co-heads of the kitchen. Peter came after college, and he had just gotten into Harvard Law School and was deferring. And he kind of felt the weight of a career and a life, and somewhat heady life. And he knew he was going into it, and he wanted to plant roots in the Dharma. So every resident who comes through here blows my mind. And it's just like everyone who shows up wants to give themselves to something true and kind of deeper. And so he showed up with this incredible aspiration to practice. And he writes, he's now graduated from Harvard Law School and is on the West Coast practicing. And he writes, living in Upaya somehow convinced my body and mind that the field of practice, or maybe the temple, is truly not limited to a building or a retreat center. That means that the smallest details of how I move through the world changed in ways that I'm still discovering. For example, now when I dust a picture frame or a baseboard, I am somehow simultaneously dusting those centimeter-wide slats on the temple soji doors. Now, when I make myself oatmeal in the morning, I am somehow simultaneously stirring the giant pot of kanji that will go out for the morning oryoki to sustain the hungry sitters. In other words, the everyday has somehow become just a little more sacred. And the three tenets and precepts feel the same. I can tell the tenets and precepts have worked their way in deep because without warning, they will pop into my mind out of nowhere and always at the same time and when they're most needed. I'll be going about my day, reading briefs about an insurance claim or an adoption or a murder, and then poof, not knowing appears and ask, how can I meet this situation with openness to both the situation and my response to it? Or I'll read about a judge or a lawyer who I may think have done something unethical or harmful, and then poof, the Buddha nature of all beings appears and asks what it would mean to see the Buddha in that judge or that lawyer and in myself. So although I do sometimes think or read about the precepts, it is in those spontaneous moments that I think are the real fruit of my time practicing in Upaya. Those moments make lots of tiny differences in the way I engage in work, relationships, and community, and I hope those tiny differences can add up to leading a life of practice. Great writer. It was nice to hear from him. I hadn't heard from Peter in a while. So the last one and the one that inspired me to reach out to people was, maybe it was Emily 2 weeks ago during seminar said, tell us a story. And I didn't know what to say, so I told the story of Rob, who was a resident here, who came into residency right as I did 8 years ago. He was 21, I was 29. We had what felt like a big age difference. And he just came from the Hare Krishnas for like a year, and he was a big, jolly, kind of wild human who, I think I told this at the seminar, we'd go play basketball and he'd be like, I only know how to play street basketball. I'm like, what does that mean? And he would just like tackle everyone who had the ball. And he was irreverent, kind of couldn't get him to follow any rules, but he also had the deepest commitment to seeking and to the Dharma and to everyone here. So he was this wonderful conundrum, and he left after a year. And after some time, he became a Theravadan monk, and he's now in Thailand. His name's no longer Rob, it's Bhante Varapanyo. And we just text over WhatsApp because he's like living in a monastery. I think actually now he's in southern France, but he's mostly been in Thailand. And so I'll end with what Rob wrote, which is, he says, what I look back on is community, the feeling of compassion, intimacy, and vulnerability that allowed me to heal and grow. I lead a meditation group every day, and we chant the Heart Sutra and the Bodhisattva precepts. And so Zen is very close to my heart, even as I'm a Theravadan monk now. I must say that my year at Upaya was the most transformative and healing experience of my almost 30 years of life. Sweet to hear. So if you're listening on the podcast or from the cloud, maybe you want to be a resident. I think all of us have this desire to be monks somewhere in us. And it's an incredible gift to step away and wear black for a time and be nobody and see what's there when we're not being anyone. And it's certainly not a vacation to be a resident, but it's very fruitful. And everyone who's come and everyone in this room has, I don't like naturally, I just wasn't born with the tendency to like love everybody. But I love everybody who comes to be a resident from the moment they show up, because there's something that binds us. There's something that we all have, or I see in each other. That's so immediate. So I'm very grateful for everyone in this room practicing together, everyone who's come to practice in this way, who's been willing to sell me water by the river when I need it. So thank you, everyone.